Now we gotta make sure it's on. They're good.
Just a quick audio check. Are you guys able to hear me? Awesome. Thanks.
Great. So our next speaker is Swapnil, and he's going to be talking about how to defend our Android devices from malware.
Awesome. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Swapnil Deshmukh. I'm here to talk about packing your Android. What we would be discussing about would be how to unharden the hardened applications that are already out there from a malware standpoint itself. So the applications are normally hardened using the techniques called as obfuscations or packers or protector itself, and we'll see without even rooting your devices itself, how can you extract information from there. Before we start with our presentation itself, there is a quick housekeeping stuff that I just want to run by you guys. The first one is that whatever we would be seeing in this particular presentation itself, the research that led me to this particular presentation itself, and the samples and the demo itself is already a part of a GitHub. So feel free, check it out. If you have any questions itself, you can certainly reach out to me and I can help you out in any form I could. The second one is a disclaimer. So this is what my company has asked me to state out. The views and opinions that are expressed in this particular presentation itself is purely mine as an individual researcher itself. And I would really appreciate if we don't tag it to the company that I'm currently working on or have worked in the past. So now that we have it out of the door itself, a quick who am I? I'm a co-author of Hackers Exposed series. The latest one that we have is Mobile Hacking itself that got published in 2014. The second one is I'm currently leading a security team for emerging technology itself for a fintech company, a company that you regularly use for payment itself. Another one is I'm a malware researcher as well. We look at different malwares that are already out there, either in Google Play Stores or our trusted Play Stores itself, identify them, report it back to the Google itself so that they can take that application out. A few places where you can reach out to me, the Twitter handle is up there. Another project that I have started is a malware framework itself. It analyzes, it's an abstraction of all the different malwares that we can see from an endpoint standpoint itself. At this given point itself, the focus area is very much towards the Android and the IoT side of things. But gradually, we are going to create this framework across for all the different endpoints that we can think of. The code itself is currently in first phase, where it will just do a discovery of all the different packers or protectors or obfuscators that are out there. In the phase 2 itself, it will remove all the redundancies, all the hardened code itself to give you a human readable code so that we can understand what a malicious author is trying to do at any given point. There is a live instance of this application that is running as well, and that would be in the malware repository. So now that we have a level set around what I have done so far, we as a security evangelist as well, why is it important for us to understand what Android malware is all about and how is it impacting us? So these are the few news clippings that I have gathered in past month or so that basically talks about the magnitude of mobile malwares itself and how it's impacting us. And it doesn't have an audio. It's basically talking about millions and millions of devices that have been impacted at this given point itself. This is about a malware that got released out in 2017. Recently called Hummingbird. It was collecting a lot of information from a user standpoint itself and sending it back to a command and center. The third one is where they're stating out that it's impacting 21 million users itself, and there was a handful of applications that they found in Google Play Store itself that was impacting users. So the takeaway from these presentations or from this news clippings itself is that there are lots of malware authors that are impacting our trusted Play Stores itself, your Google Play Stores or any third-party Play Stores that you're trusting at this given point itself. They have already infiltrated in there as well. On top of it, it's all impacting like 21 million odd users. So considering the US population itself, it's 1 in every 11 people who would be impacted with malware. So that's a very big surface area itself. The third is that there was a supposed report that came out with regards to the sample growth of an malware at any given point, and they are predicting a 31% year-on-year growth of malware genomes itself. That's a very, very big percentage, right? We right now have a sample of close to 230 odd genomes. So a 30% increase of that is close to 300 malware genomes in 2018. So that's a huge malwares that would be released out. They even state out that 1 in 3 applications that was released in 2017. So this particular year itself has some or the other malware genome itself. So it's 1 in the 3 applications that you guys or we have installed in 2017 itself may be impacted with malware genome. So it becomes very important for us as a security personnel itself to understand what that malware is trying to do and how we can identify those. So the main questions that we all would be having at this given point itself is there are tools out there, open source tools out there that will analyze a lot of applications for us, right? So why exactly is it so difficult for us to analyze an hardened application? The main reason why it's difficult for Google Play or for malicious authors itself, or antivirus solutions rather, or even for us to evaluate the code is because it's heavily obfuscated. It's completely mangled code, so we are not able to form a human readable code after decompiling it, so which makes it very difficult for us to read it. Along with that, they also have something called as root detection checks. If you're running it in a compromised environment itself, or if you're running it in a VM to a memory dump, they will identify that, and they will basically deflate the malware content itself, because of which it's very difficult for someone to identify it. Along with that, in 2016 itself, we saw something called as anti-tampering being attached to malware authors itself. Anti-tampering is basically creating a checksums of different code blocks that we have within the bytecode. And those checksums would again have their own checksums itself, and they create a pyramid of these checksums, making it very, very difficult for anyone to modify the code or even create a hook so that we can put the logs around what a packer is doing or what a protector is doing at any given point. In 2017, there were few of the malwares that we saw that was encrypting SD card. So your SD card information itself was completely encrypted, and the information was hard-coded within your application stack itself. However, they were using something called as white box cryptography, which will obfuscate the keys that are obfuscating or encrypting your SD card. So if you do a decompilation of the entire code itself to identify where the passcodes are, it was very difficult for us because they create a secure world which will have an abstraction of an crypto library altogether. So it was very, very difficult for us to identify what those keys are to decrypt the data. So that was a new trend that we saw in 2017. On top of it, a lot of malware authors are already using something called as anti-emulation, which identifies that you're running either a GDB or JDWB, for example, or you're running it in Google bouncers, for example, which which validates the application before it's been published in Google Play Store, and it will either create a time box scenario in case of Google Bouncer, because Google Bouncer only validates an application for 5 minutes. So this malware content itself will deflate for 5 minutes, and once it's out in Play Store itself, it will inflate after that. So which makes it very difficult for Google Bouncers to identify those code. Or there are certain ones that will see that you're hooking it either through a GDB or JDWP, which will basically create a breakpoints for you. And it will deflate the malware content itself, which will make it difficult for us to identify it. So now we understand the challenges on why we are not able to identify it at this given point itself. There are few research papers that are already out there, and there are few over here, and there are few on the GitHub as well, that states out on how you can get this data in a human readable format. However, the tools that they are released out are obsolete in many different ways because the packer has grown over a period of time itself, and the tool has stayed back in 2016 or 2015 itself, making it difficult for us to understand what they are trying to do. However, they are very good stepping stone to understand how we can read through a packer, or how can we read into a protector file itself. So all said and done, there are a few hardening techniques that I've been talking about for a while. Obfuscator is one of them. This is one of the easiest one to bypass at this given point itself. Obfuscators are they will scramble your data, so your class name, method names, or variable names would be mangled in some form. A very good example in case of Java, we have a package called com.BSidesPhilly 2017, for example. Then it will change that from that to com.a. So it makes it difficult for us to understand what exactly that obfuscation technique is doing. Along with that, they also have something called as control for obfuscation. So your if statements or try-catch statements itself would completely change to a switch statement with a lot of dead code been put in. As an ethical hacker, if you're doing a breakpoint around what these applications are doing at this given point itself, it becomes very, very difficult for us to track that. Because then you have to go through a different call function itself that will call a different return function or a different stub, and it returns a null value itself because it's a dead code, it's not doing anything at any given point. That's why it becomes more challenging for us to read through the code when you have control for obfuscation. Java reflection and string encryption both together makes it another avenue for us to make the code very difficult to read. What ideally they do is they encrypt the entire string and they put that in the file itself in the Java bytecode. And on top of it, they use Java reflection. So they're calling class for name or method for name, for example, with an encrypted string. And you first have to decrypt that string in order to understand what the next action would be that they would take. So a few tools that we looked at. This is a malware that was released out in May 2017. This was using a tool called ProGuard, which comes out of the box in case of Android itself. This particular tool, the one in orange, or the one that is highlighted in orange itself, is how you basically obfuscate a class name. But this was a ransomware. It will basically create a device lock for you, and you have to pay 0.6 bitcoins to them in order to get the lock code back. So when we decompiled the application itself, the lock code was hard-coded itself. So if you look at the one in the red, the lock code was 1008. If you traverse through the method itself, what it is trying to do is it's setting a passcode, and then it's calling the EMM services, the management services itself, to put a lock on the device. This lock can only be unlocked if you're setting the right password, or you can reset the password rather if you have the right password itself in place. So which makes it very difficult for a normal user to unlock their device itself. So either they have to pay the malicious content itself, or the ransomware rather, or they have to wipe the entire device itself so that they can use it from that point on. The second obfuscator is actually a protector that is obfuscating the code. So this particular protector is called TZ malware. So this was released in November 2017, so a month ago, and this was impacting a lot of African market itself. So they basically were connecting to a command and center itself, from where they were pushing a lot of code back on either an update on Google Play itself, which would be a malicious Google Play. And what they were doing was they were obfuscating using Java reflections itself. So if you look, they were using class.forName with an encoding after that. And they have a function called onCreate, and they had 7 different instances with different arguments when passed over. So in order for us to decrypt that data itself, or decrypt the string, we had to traverse back through all the different 7 function calls that they had. And after that, we were able to understand what library are they calling at this given point itself. So after a day and a half of reading through the code itself, we understood that they basically are calling a function with this particular method name itself. So they were calling run, and that run was basically loading the file itself. The third obfuscator that we looked at was an SMS service. They were basically sending SMS to a premium number itself with your geolocation. So they were basically tracking you at any given point itself. They were using very strong string encryption with a non-human readable code. So as you can see, this is the one that we got from a Java bytecode. We were hardly able to understand what exactly it's trying to do itself. So we went through, so there are two things that they were doing. They were calling an import function. So if you look at the HHH thing, that was the first one that got called for every time around they were trying to decrypt the data. So that was our first entry point to look at what exactly are they trying. And then there was a function call that was called with 3 arguments in place. They were sending the strings, and the other two arguments were the characters itself. So that was the function call that they were calling. This function call, the first argument and the third argument was either ANDed or ORed, and the number of times it would be AND or it will go through an OR itself would be based on the second argument. The character would be converted into an int first. So we looked at those. We created a Python script that will basically read through the entire Oxen code itself, understand what they're trying to do, and get a human readable malware payload injection itself that they're trying to inject at any given point. So it makes it very easy for us to understand what they're trying to do at this given point. After obfuscation itself, the second hardening technique that we have looked at is called Packer. Packer does a dynamic code modification of the code itself. So there are 2 execution environments that has been supported by Android. One is the Dalvik and another one is Android runtime itself. So Dalvik supports dynamic code loading at any given point. So what most of the packers do is they have a native code, and that native code would start injecting new code back to this stub that they have created, and that stub would basically create the decrypted code to decrypt the real classes.txt. And we'll look at few examples as we go along. The second one that we looked at was in-file loading. So they modified the header bytes itself that would have the classes file in the buffer itself, and they will pull that out from the buffer and decrypt the data. So it was in plain sight itself that they will try to hide it. Under the hood, this is how Packer actually works. There are in an application file itself, there are 2 parts of it. There is a compiled manifest and there is the source. Compiled source itself. The compiled manifest is called Android manifest.xml. That gets invoked. That Android manifest itself has a complete map of how to call Java files and what native files to be would be called as well. And the source has the actions and the views behind it and how it needs to be called. So the main thing that we are evaluating when we are trying to unharden an application from a static perspective itself is the Android XML, Android manifest.xml and the classes.txt. So what a packer would do is it will basically modify your manifest, Android manifest, so that it basically first calls the stub, which is the loader classes.txt, and then once that stub has been called, once the stub has been opened itself, it will decrypt the classes.txt that actually has to be executed. And the buffer itself would be read either in the memory itself or it can be done in file. So the first one that we looked at was released in October 2017. They were using a very newish packer that we haven't looked at yet called JumJ2. This one was loading a file, a native file itself, and that native file was reading certain header buffers. And that buffers would take that information from there, mangle that buffer a bit, and then create a classes.txt from it. So by looking at the code itself, by looking at the assembly code of how the native library is loading it, we created a Python script that basically would re-scramble this scrambled code that they have and pull that information from the header byte itself. So the one that has been, so the ones that highlighted in red is the increase in the buffer size, the header size itself. A classes.txt would have a header size of close to 112-ish or so bytes. In this case, they had a header size of like 6 figures. So that was a very good indicator that they are trying to hide something inside the header bytes itself. So we pull that information out in a read buffer itself. After pulling that information out, so the first 1024 were the real classes.dex, and after that was the header files. So we took that entire header files, put it right in front of it, and the later 1024 was our classes.dex, right? So we stored that in a text file, used dex2jar to convert that file into human readable code. And that's how we were able to pull the classes.dex, that is actually the malicious content itself. The second one was another one that was released in November 2017. This particular one was a fake WhatsApp application. It would first install a gaming application, and after the gaming application has been installed, it will call Command and Center itself and pull a fake WhatsApp application from there and replace your WhatsApp application that you already have installed and push it as an update for you. So we talked about stubs. So if you look at the application tag itself, they have an Android name called Android Support Multidex. That's the first one that gets called for executing the loader file itself. So it's security threw up security. They just renamed it to something else. So after they make that particular call itself, if you look at the screenshot below, the one that is highlighted in red, is where they're calling up the stub along with the hash code itself. This hash code would identify that it is this particular library that it has to call along with these arguments. The arguments would be sent out to a load library called secondhand. This is a native code that they had. This native code would first do a device integrity check to make sure that they're running in a real device and it's not in an emulated device itself. And the second thing that it will do is an application integrity itself to make sure that it's not being breached, you're not hooking into emulators itself. Once that's done, they will take that hash code itself and they will take a new file that has been stored in the device into a read buffer itself and decrypt that classes.dex and store that in the memory. Now, next time, after making sure that the integrity check has been successful, it will call the Command and Center and pull an APK file from there and install that on your device itself. Now, if that fails, let's say if the check itself fails, then it will basically deflate this classes.dex from the memory itself and load a gaming application instead. So, in order for us to analyze this further, what we did was we basically created a Python script that would be released out as a second phase of our engagement that would basically use this as a hash code, go and talk to second-hand native library itself. Considering that it's a universal binary, most of the APKs that we have looked at are universal binaries itself. So we are talking to an x86 itself, pulling out that hash code from, pulling out the classes.dex from there by using the hash code that was provided in the code itself. And we were able to pull out a classes.dex. Once we have the classes.dex itself, you use dex2jar to just convert that file from there on. The third in the line that we have is Wiki. Wiki was used for an adware. So this particular application itself would click ads on your behalf. This was loading two native files itself. And then it was loading the text file, the encrypted classes.dex files that we had. It was loading those. When we inspected the Java files further, they will decrypt this data and store this in files folder itself within your application directory. So during the run of an application, we just did an ADB backup to just pull that information out from there and then further analyze it using the tools that we already know of. So the third in the list is the protector. So protector makes our life a lot harder, to be honest, because it's a combination of both obfuscation and packers. So protector basically would be using a loader stub, but the information of how to load that stub itself would be obfuscated using the string or control flow obfuscation that we already have seen in the past. Along with that, they will have dead code injection in there as well, making it difficult for us to read the code. One such example that we looked at was Dex Protector. This Dex Protector itself was loading a stub, as you can see through the application stack itself. But along with loading the stub itself, the classes.dex was heavily obfuscated at this given point itself, so it was very difficult for us to like backtrack it on what exactly are they trying to do. So we went through all the different 7 classes of obfuscation and how they are trying to do the obfuscation itself, removed the dead code, and after that, the first thing that we came to know is it's calling another Java class that will have the stub in place. So we got that. So dexprotected.name was one of them that gets invoked. So we went in there, we got the stub information, the hash code itself that they're using, and that provided us with an avenue of how we can decompile the classes.dex. So now that we have looked into all the different obfuscation techniques itself, there is a quick demo that I have. This demo this demo is basically the repository that we have. So at this given point itself, we have 427 different genomes that we have identified from an Android standpoint itself. They all have been published on a repository itself. So this information would basically give us different types of payload and payload injection that they're trying to do. And it will provide you with more details around from where you can find more information about it. Along with that, we also provide an avenue of us to like upload an APK itself, do a static analysis of that application that has been uploaded, the text file that has been uploaded, to further inspect what kind of a protector or what kind of a packer are they using. So an example of that. So this is an example of one of the packers that I uploaded recently. So as you can see, it provides me with the packer information that we are using, and it also provides me with where the application is getting injected within the manifest file itself. So these are like the pointers towards how I can analyze this hardened application further. So now that we have seen a quick demo of how the application actually works, how we can see an hardened application itself, and how we can retrieve the classes.text, which is the Java bytecode itself that has the information, the malicious payload itself, where can we go next? So we are already creating malware genomes, as you can see. Now the next step within our process itself that would be launched in January 2018 itself is to do a static analysis of this application. So now that we have Dex Protector and we have the now that we have classes.dex and we have the manifest file itself, how can we marry both the things together itself to understand the entire call graph of it, and based on that, understand what kind of a protector are we using or what kind of a packer are we using, and break that to get a human readable code itself so that we can analyze it further to identify what are the malwares that are already out there in our trusted app store itself. The second thing that we want to do is do a dynamic analysis of this application as well to further analyze what premium numbers, what information has been sent to this premium number itself. And that would be done by creating a lot of hooks within the application itself as we identify statically what that application does. So this dynamic analysis would be done through packing of an application. So that being said, we are also looking at IoT, as I stated before. This is one of the malware that I'm researching at this given point itself that connects to your light, and that information is being sent out back to a command and center itself in two forms. In form of an MQTT format itself that has information whether the light has been turned on or off, or do you have any certain home alarm that has been compromised, and that information will be going back to a command and center itself. Along with that, they also have an XMPP protocol that will send out your information with regards to your location or with regards to your SMS services itself. So we are looking in details around that. And this is a very good example of it, because what they're trying to do at this given point itself is create an MQTT host and protocol. Along with that, the string 3 and string 4 that you're looking at is the username and password that they're sending on behalf itself to attack us further with what information they can get. So that being said, that's all that I have from a presentation standpoint itself. Let me know if you have any questions with regards to this.
Yeah.
Thanks. Hey, thanks for the presentation. I had a question about the libraries that could be used for creating something like this. Is it the libraries themselves that are the problem, like the frameworks that people are using, or are they just or people actually knowingly creating these just to make exploits? Meaning, is it if it's just a college student creating a regular app using a framework that has all of these exploits already built into it, or are they just creating it themselves? That's the first question.
So there's a mix of both that I have seen so far. There are 30-odd standard ones that are out there that does a packet or protection in a certain format itself. However, in the recent time itself, like the Outcry that we looked at or Jump J2 that we looked at in this particular presentation itself, those are homegrown. Those have been made by certain malicious malware authors itself to further obfuscate the code in such a way that we cannot read it. So it's a mix of both at this given point.
And the next question, I kind of saw a brief bit of the Poppy Seed app. Like, what exactly does that do? Is it just looking at the manifest file and then following the class that Java, or how can we look at all the details, or I guess?
True. So in order for you to get the loader stub installed, you first have to. It has to be the first one that gets called, and the only way that you can do it is through the application tag itself. So when we are inspecting that further, the first injection point would be application tags, and that's the reason why that's the first one that we are looking at.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Great. Another round of applause then for Swapnil.